Troublemakers. Bill Maher. Bill Maher. He is feeling the pressure from us. And this is how I know. One, you guys are clearly over there in his real-time YouTube feed, giving him well-deserved shit for his ignorant, misogynistic, downright dangerous editorial about victims of domestic violence, which disproportionately affects women. And some of you have told me, you've emailed me directly to say that you're going over to that feed and that you've been writing HBO Max and to say that this guy needs to issue a retraction, which he does, and issue an apology for putting some very dangerous misinformation about what goes on in relationships that are plagued by domestic violence out into the culture. He's got a lot of men who watch him and listen to him, a lot of young men, older men. He did some real damage. And we're going to take his attempts at crisis managing this apart because I still don't think he's really listening to anybody who knows what they're talking about. Secondly, this is also how I know, because I watched Real Time on Friday night, and as I expected, he said nothing about it. But this was how he tried to do damage control, because he had his first guest, which is a one-on-one interview, was a female. It was Whitney Cummings, who's like, she's like a B-list comedian. She's off. She's a little off. And she is a single mom now, and she's basically talking to him about how she had a kid with a guy she barely knows. So it makes it sound like she got pregnant during some kind of one-night stand. And she says, like, I'm co-parenting with somebody I barely know. Okay, so someone you want to listen to. But Bill Maher sat there and not only feigned interest in stories of her single motherhood, but asked her questions. And we all know if there's one thing that bores Bill Maher to tears, it's any talk of domesticity, let alone motherhood. Okay, then we toddle over to the real-time, panel discussion. And lo and behold, instead of two men, as there usually it's two men, there's a man and a woman. So it was Jonah Goldberg, who, like, he and Brett Stevens, I can never tell them apart. It's like a type. It's just a type. And then Stephanie Ruhle, who is not bright. And, again, Bill really, really held himself back, because when somebody speaks to something that they're really in over their head about, or they're just not making sense, or they clearly just don't know what they're talking about, Bill is never shy about, it's like he does three things. He like slaps the desk, he rolls the eyes, and then he does the cluck. So it's like a 1, 2, 3. And he asked Stephanie Ruhle and Jonah Goldberg about the rise in anti-Semitic attacks in America. And Stephanie Ruhle leaned forward and said, in all seriousness, you know what we need to do, Bill? You know what we need to do? We need to get taxpayer money to have the federal government form like a task force or a think tank to think about ways to combat this. I mean, moronic. And Bill sat there and he took it like it was a serious thought. Okay, that's how you know Bill Maher knows he's in trouble with women. Thirdly, he went on to TMZ to explain himself to Harvey Levin and the indignity, because the great Bill Maher didn't get just a one-on-one. He was reduced to a panel discussion. And you'll see his head in these reels, like in the beginning reel especially, you'll see his head is the size of like a postage stamp in the lower right-hand corner. And then there are two other panelists that I don't even recognize, which means Bill was forced to consort with non-celebrities. Okay, that is a real punishment for him. So Bill zoomed in from his, I would call it like his like scuzzy granddad's man cave at Club Random to explain how now when I say we, I mean definitely you, me, and all the troublemakers, because we're the only people pushing back like this. We're the ones who got what he said on his own show in a monologue that he allegedly writes himself. That real-time editorial is apparently Bill Maher has the final sign-off, and he's allegedly the writer of it. So we got what he said all wrong, how we're too lazy and stupid to understand what he said and, why women are still to blame. We begin.
I was fascinated by your editorial, essentially saying that women now have agency. Women have the ability to leave an abusive relationship. And Cassie essentially made a deal with the devil that if you want a #1 hit, you have to do certain things to get it. It's your call whether you want it or not. In her case, freak-offs, which you say the text show she was enthusiastic about. Is that a fair characterization of what you're saying?
Not completely. I wasn't saying that those texts that she wrote were sincere. I don't think they were. I don't think she was enjoying the freak-offs.
Oh, so that's not what he said? Let's roll tape.
If you're Me Tooing someone, it doesn't help your case if you texted him, "Me too. I just want it to be uncontrollable." If you want us to think you weren't always ready to freak off, don't write, "I'm always ready to freak off." Or wish we could have FO'd before you left. One sign you're pretty comfortable with something is when you call it by its initials.
I love video. You can't lie your way out of video. Can't do it. That is exactly what he said. And we here at The Nerve, we didn't edit anything out of context. There was nothing he said before or after that ameliorated that statement, that somehow got into the nuances of when and where women might have reason to perhaps placate their abuser. None. Next, Bill, with his soft, tiny hands, keeps digging that hole.
But that just goes to the point that sometimes people do things that they really don't want to do for some greater good.
He just did it again. He just said that women who are in abusive relationships, who get the shit beat out of them by their excuses for men, are doing it for some greater good. The greater good, of course, in Bill's world, being fame, money, and power, because what else matters than that? There's no greater good than that. Okay, continuing on his explanation to Harvey freaking Levin over at TMZ.
I noticed the people who came after me, they always do it in such bad faith. They never include, first of all, they're probably too lazy to watch the whole thing.
Okay. That's me. I act always in good faith, Bill, unlike you. And I watched your editorial 3 times in its entirety, front to back, the night it aired, to make sure that I was hearing what I thought I was hearing, because I couldn't frankly believe it. And then in preparation of the first show where we took you to the woodshed, I took that thing apart like the Zapruder film. I went back, forth, slow motion, captions, transcripts, because there's nothing more indisputable than hanging someone with their own words. And we have the benefit of your smug, smarmy, dismissive facial expressions to reinforce what you're actually saying, okay? And then I had to rewatch it again for this well-deserved follow-up. And you know what I caught? I caught something else, because like all great art, every time you look at it, you catch something new. What struck me this time is how pleased Bill was with himself during this particular editorial. I mean, he's always pleased with himself, but this time he took it to another level. Okay, back to Bill on TMZ.
I went to great lengths to talk about how I completely understand how women would, as counterintuitive as it is, or as it seems, write a complimentary text, for example, or email to an abuser after they were abused, because especially before the Me Too movement, not that things have changed completely, but they've changed a lot, which is a big point I was making.
He went to great lengths. Again, we're the idiots. Tell me, Bill, how this squares with your new rule regarding victims of domestic violence. Take a look.
But a lot has changed. Cosby and R. Kelly went to prison. Harvey Weinstein is going to die in prison. Larry Nassar is serving 175 years. Jeffrey Epstein was murdered in his jail cell by Hillary Clinton. Post-Me Too, reporting of sexual crimes is way up, as is the percent of women who say they're now more likely to speak out if victimized. And many states have changed laws making it easier for victims to come forward. We're not in the no one listens to women or takes them seriously era anymore. Operators are actually standing by to take your calls.
To take your calls. Funny. You know, we're going to hear in a little bit from a female celebrity who found herself calling a domestic violence hotline. And I doubt you'll be laughing then, Bill, or your guest, Jake Tapper, who thought that was so funny, you know? But who knows? Because Bill Maher is such a sick fuck who clearly hates women. I don't know, maybe he will find it funny. Back to Bill on TMZ.
You know, when you had people like Cosby and Harvey Weinstein and looked like nobody ever had to pay the piper for what they were doing, well, you know, that's why you might write that complimentary text after you were abused, because at least you're going to get something out of it.
Oh my God, again, he doesn't fucking get it. He won't get it. He refuses to get it. You don't, as I said in the piece in the prior episode, Taking Bill Down, I believe it was episode 12, but they'll let me know. I spoke about the initial Harvey trial. By the way, Harvey's appealing his guilty verdict in New York right now. Okay. So he might, you know, he could get off on that. There was an expert who took the stand who explained, again, to a jury composed of more men than women, that often when a rapist or a sexual abuser is known to the victim, they are victimized by somebody they have a relationship with already, that they maintain friendly relationships. Sometimes they maintain sexually intimate relationships because it's a way for them to try to make sense of what just happened to them. They've been assaulted by somebody they once trusted. It's not, but listen, I think a lot of this is Bill's own fucked up, warped view of the world. He's been in Hollywood way too long. He's idolized Hollywood way too long. In his world, I think everything is transactional, including, I'm going to guess, 99% of the relationships, and I use that word loosely, that he has had with women. It seems like everything in his life is transactional. So he thinks that's how the rest of us are working it out in life in general. Okay, let's go back to his little crisis management attempt on TMZ.
But let's live in the world, you know, the year we're living in is something I say a lot. And, you know, those guys are in jail now. A lot of people went to jail. A lot of other people can't even show their faces. You know, I'm not going to name names because they'd sue me properly, but, you know, a lot of people can't go out to dinner because they're just persona non grata, as it should be.
Okay, you know what that says to me? This is what I think. Some of them are in prison and some of them are not. And Bill knows who these men are. He knew who a lot of them were, and he knows who a lot of them are. And I do wonder if Bill's a little worried that his name might get floated someday in some sort of scandal, you know? But, you know, so let's have Bill, who's not going to name names because he doesn't want to get sued. I mean, I could name names, but whatever. He doesn't want to get sued. So he's just going to say, you know, the tragedy is that they can't go out to dinner in this town. They can't get like seated at the Polo Lounge at the Beverly Hills Hotel or at the Ivy. You know, they have to hide their faces in shame. Okay. Now let's listen to Bill again. Tell us once more, what is a valid attempt by a woman in a violent relationship? What constitutes a true attempt to leave?
In the future, because, you know, things are somewhat different now, quite a bit different. Don't tell your friends about it when it happens. Tell the police right away. That's the person who should be reading your contemporaneous notes, the police report. Because if you wait 10 years, it gets kind of murky. And again, I went to great lengths to say I understand why this has happened in the past, but I do think we should reevaluate that. And if you are being abused, especially, and again, if you're being actually captured by somebody, that's different.
Oh, that's different. That's different. By the way, that's Bill saying exactly what he said on his show. So nothing has changed. Okay, this is a very cynical attempt on his part to make people think that we misinterpreted everything that guy said. By the way, as one of you troublemakers wrote to me and you reminded me, Dominique Dunn, the actress daughter of Dominic Dunn, had left her abuser. And you know what happened? He showed up at her house and he choked her to death and she wound up on life support and she died. And that guy got like maybe 6 years. Okay. So since Bill Maher, again, so he's telling us like being captured, that's different. So let's look at what happens, like, again, to Cassie when she did what Bill says she should do and just leave, just walk out the door. Let's look at this. We're looking at Sean Combs running after Cassie, wrapped in a towel. She is at an elevator bank, lacing up her sneaker, and around the corner he comes. He grabs her neck from behind. He throws her to the ground. She goes limp. He starts kicking her, grabs her stuff. She's not moving. She's not moving on the ground. He kicks her again. He's walking above her. He grabs her by either the hair or an arm, and he starts dragging her through that elevator bank and down the hall. So I guess, Bill, maybe she just didn't try hard enough to get away, right? Okay. Now, let's have Bill explain to us how psychological abuse isn't a big deal at all.
But if it's just mental, which a lot of this was, I quoted the singer that Shia LaBeouf was with, FKA Twigs, I think is her name. And I read her quote, which said, "I could have left anytime I wanted to. I had a townhouse in London that I could have gone to." And I said, then why am I reading about this? If you could have done that, why didn't you do it?
Okay. Why didn't you do it? I explained this to Bill in the last, it was episode 13. I explained it. But, so Bill says, again, I believe he's talking to us over here. And I believe he's talking to the segment I did in that episode, that I was too lazy and stupid to watch his entire disgusting, dangerous op-ed. Bill, I spared you. I spared you the energy and the work that would have gone into Googling FKA Twigs and abuse, because you could just ask her about it because she's been brave enough to talk about it, okay? Here she is to the otherwise execrable Gayle King in February of 2021.
He would often just start having an argument with me in the middle of the night, start accusing me of doing all sorts of things, planning to leave him in my head. He'd wake me up and tell me I was disgusting, that I was vile.
All the things that he was accusing you of were absolutely not true.
Nothing was ever true. Like, this is the thing, but I would really doubt myself, especially when I'd wake up and he'd be like, "You were lying there with your eyes open, planning to leave me." And I'd be like, "I literally was asleep." But then he would only want me to sleep naked because he said if I didn't, then I was keeping myself from him. So, it's a tactic that a lot of abusers use. It's just this constant availability and everything centered around them. And I think, that's why I wanted to come out and talk about this, because the signs really are there from the beginning.
Yeah, so she's very brave to be talking this way because this is a fraction of what she went through, I guarantee you. And it's humiliating to say, yeah, the man I was with made me sleep naked every night and make myself available to him, and then gaslight me to the point where I was doubting myself. But then at the end of that clip, she says, that's an abuser tactic. They do it to make you doubt yourself so that as they escalate, you can't tell what's actually really happening anymore, or if you should even be alarmed. Okay, Bill, so there's no just mental abuse. Mental and psychological and emotional abuse is the mechanism by which these guys get to the point where, they wind up killing their women, okay? Now, she then went on to say the following to Gail.
There wasn't one set moment, but it's very subtle. That's the thing about, you know, domestic abuse, domestic violence. It's a real gradual, step-by-step process to get somebody to a place where they lose themselves so much they accept or feel like they deserve to be treated in that way. It's not one thing, it's loads of tiny little things that get sewn together into a nightmare.
A nightmare. That, Bill, is the mental part of breaking down victims so that they don't know which end is up by the time they start putting hands on you or raping you. And you just can't make sense of it because this is happening to you at the hands of the person that you love more than anybody in the world. But again, I don't think Bill Maher has ever experienced real love. Sorry, I don't. And so he has no idea here. And because women, per his own self-report, he talks about this all the time on his show, always rejected him in his teens and 20s. And many women out of his league probably do to this day. It's probably why he loves sex workers. He has to rationalize all that rejection by making women, in his mind, weak and dumb and passive people who deserve to get the shit beat out of them, okay? Now, here's FKA Twigs around that same time going into even more detail to the BBC. And this is harrowing. You're not going to believe it. I'm going to warn you. This is graphic and it's violent. Listen to this.
After the incident driving back from the desert where he was threatening to crash the car unless I said I loved him and ended up basically strangling me in public at a gas station and nobody did anything. That was a really low moment for me because I felt like I would never be believed. And
there were bystanders at the gas station who saw what was happening and didn't step in.
No, nobody stepped in.
So you can see why FKA Twigs might feel helpless and hopeless if nobody made a move to intervene as he's putting hands on her in a public place. Okay. Next, she tells, again, Bill, listen, use both ears and use your eyes and watch and listen as FKA Twigs talks about, as Bill says to us, operators are standing by to take your call. You know, fuck off. Here's FKA Twigs on calling after getting back from that harrowing attack, calling a hotline for women who are stuck in domestic abusive relationships.
And I remember going back to where I was staying and calling an abused women's helpline. And I literally just Googled like free women's abuse helpline USA. You know, I just called the first one that came up. And her reaction to me was so serious. And she was like, okay, from what you've said, it feels to me like you're in an unsafe place. Does your abuser know where you are? Can you get to a safe place? Who have you told about this? Is there somewhere else that you can stay? Very like black and white, like almost when you call like a paramedic, is the person breathing? And it felt really like, whoa, like somebody that I don't even know, that doesn't even know that like I'm a singer or anything like that. Somebody's taking this so seriously and wants to get me somewhere safe. And that was a really massive wake-up call. That's the time when I realised like I need a lot of help to get out of this. And that's when I started messaging. I messaged my best friend and I said, I'm in a really abusive relationship and it's really bad.
So again, to Bill's, I just fucking lost my whatever. To Bill's point, like, telling women who are being beaten by their men, you know, I don't want to hear about your contemporaneous accounts that you told your best friend 10 years ago. You know, that's her saying, first of all, I'm humiliated because like I'm ostensibly a woman with power. I'm a successful singer. I perform to loads of people who cheer for me, but I'm getting the shit beaten out of me, and I feel extremely helpless. And she hadn't even told her best friend. Of course she hadn't, because that is so humiliating. It is so humiliating, and it goes to the layers and the nuance of this issue. So now she's called this domestic abuse hotline, and the woman on the other end says, okay, are you safe? Does your abuser know where you are? Can you get to somewhere safe? Because as discussed last episode, Bill, the most dangerous time for a woman is when she decides to leave. And you can't just walk out the door. That's when you're most likely to get killed. Okay. You need to have a plan in place. And, again, the cops, oftentimes this stuff isn't taken seriously. Okay. So anyway, here's FKA Twigs on what she goes and she gets a therapist. And here she's talking about how long it still took her to get out of this relationship. And watch at the end here, because there is a statement from Shia LaBeouf, who denied this shit for a while. And well, you can only lie about this stuff for so long. Watch this.
And I got a therapist who I started seeing twice a week. And I think about maybe a few months after I started that process, I was able to leave and leave for good. I knew it wouldn't work. It was more just like, for me, I had to spend a lot of time before I could leave, just trying to gather enough of myself together so that I knew when I left, I really wouldn't go back and I wouldn't give in no matter what he did.
In response to the allegations against him, I'm reading from the BBC report, Shia LaBeouf has said in statements, quote, many of the allegations are not true, end quote, but also, quote, I have no excuses for my alcoholism or aggression, only rationalizations. I have been abusive to myself and everyone around me for years. I have a history of hurting the people closest to me. I'm ashamed of that history, and I am sorry to those I hurt. There is nothing else I can really say. Well, Bill, you owe women everywhere a retraction and an apology. And to the troublemakers out there, I say keep going. Bombard HBO Max. Bombard Bill Maher's YouTube feed, bombard Bill Maher and his reps, and make it clear that this is the only outcome that will be acceptable. David Zaslav, the head of HBO Max, cares about one thing, and that's money. So if he starts shedding subscribers over this shit, there's going to be some real trouble. Keep going, my troublemakers.